A very good morning to you all. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Ayo Makinde.
And from Abuja, good morning. I'm Maupe Ogunyosef.
Well, picking up on this matter, we have this letter that was written to us by an anonymous member of this Chinese company operating in Nigeria, in Abia State, Umahia. So the person wrote in and raised some concerns which should be of interest to anyone, because this goes to the heart of a lot of challenges. Because I mean, it was yesterday when it was also almost all over the news about, I mean, it's been consistent how Nigerian companies, I'm talking about Africa, how they are regarded and treated, mistreated. The recent one now in Ghana, they're talking about whether or not they're complying with the laws, their shops are being locked. So they're faced with all of those scenarios. But back home here, you would have thought that perhaps if companies that come here, much as yes, we consistently seek foreign direct investments, we do expect that there will be standards that will be complied with. So this letter was written to us about this Chinese company. They say their staff strength is about 1,500 workers. And so they say they've been operating in the country since 2015 with their headquarters located in Lagos at pilot plots, I think somewhere in Amodofe Industrial Estate. The company, the person says, has sacked several of its employees without any reason whatsoever. Many have died in this company. So many have been injured. They've got 400 Chinese expatriates without complete papers, working without offer letter to their members of staff. Sexual harassment is the order of the day. And then he goes on to say that in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, this company doesn't want its workers to go home and stay safe. Rather, the company wants workers to remain in the company without any proper arrangement whatsoever. And so he also did say, look, that from what the way it turns out there is that if you refuse to stay, you will be sacked. And then there are images now, because the matter is gaining a lot of attention in the social media, where you see images of how the working condition and the environment is. It is, you never would expect anyone to be in that kind of scenario. So they are camped there, they're lodged there. They say you're not allowed to gather whatsoever. You can't complain about anything or protest. This is what is already out there, which is being circulated that much. And as a matter of fact, it gained so much attention such that the FCCPA, you know them, they used to be consumer protection. They're still consumer protection. So Mr. Rukera did tweet about that particular matter, saying, well, there you go. Although this is a labor issue it's a matter for the Ministry of Labor, but the FCCPC has previously intervened in a similar situation, but they will be progressing with this case by sending that to the steering committee, Ministry of Labor, so that they could take it up for further action. So it really leaves a lot to be desired.
What's interesting about this particular organization is that it was reported January last year. They were planning to be the biggest, the largest steel company in West Africa, with a promise of recruiting something in the region of 3,000 workers as at that time. Now, for this report to be coming out now, it raises a lot of questions for me. We've been talking about, this whole security or no security issues and security agencies. What I found out is that there is an agency of government responsible for guaranteeing who are the people that come into Nigeria, certifying that they can stay in Nigeria, and authorizing them with papers. So on the one hand is the fact that we have given them papers to stay in this nation. That's trying to talk about some of the issues raised in that letter about, the completion or the validity or otherwise of their papers. So we definitely have records of the people that we have given papers. If their papers have expired, how come they have expired and no one has been able to call any one of them to question. I'm talking about the immigration service now. That's on the one hand. On the other hand is that they are domiciled in a particular state, and I'm very, very sure there is no way an organization will be working in a particular state and the state government will not know about it. Well, there are reports out there that the governor has sent word there. Is it true indeed that the governor has sent, officials there to check? That's another thing entirely. And then we're also talking about these inhuman conditions of service that these people have been put over the years. Now, there are so many questions there. Now, we are talking about one Chinese company today. There are also reports of another Chinese company, I think, in Ogun State, where the House of Representatives had to intervene and say, look, let the IG go do something there and rescue like 1,000 workers. It's not the first time we are hearing about an Ikorodu company as well. I think it's a Lebanese company, that's, also treated people inhumanly in these environments. And all we hear is we try an intervention, and after that, nothing is really done structurally to ensure that these things don't happen again. So these things continue over and over again, especially from Asian-related companies. I don't know if we can say that we are helpless on this matter. Is it because the unemployment is so grave and the government isn't able to do anything about it? Consequently, people are forced to eke out a living any way they can. Are we so helpless? I don't know, but this is definitely calling government at all levels to attention to please do something and ensure that these kind of things don't happen. It happens outside Nigeria, just as Chamberlain talked about, that we're talking about it happening at home. That's absolutely unbearable. Okay.
Indeed, Ayo, it is unbearable. It is untenable. We cannot, continue to accept these sort of stories, and they abound, as you rightly pointed out, in such a way that we have to ask ourselves the question: what exactly are we waiting for before we decide to act? What do we need to trigger our action as a people, as a country? My suggestion will be, considering just how many ministries, beg your pardon, parastatals and what have you, are under the Ministry of Labor. Maybe this is something that, the Ministry of Labor is not interested. They haven't shown any interest whatsoever in handling matters like this, the inhuman, treatment of a lot of Nigerians in their labor, in their places of work, especially factory workers. And this is not the first time we're beginning to see reports such as this. So first and foremost, we should ask the Minister of Labor and the Ministry of Labor, what are the challenges, facing that ministry in terms of dealing with challenges like this? Should we have a task force in the meantime, to deal with such matters, however ad hoc it is, a task force that will go around? I just don't know how feasible that will be, to have a national task force, for instance, going around states looking for companies that, people make complaints about, or to ensure that standards are kept in factories and what have you. I don't know if that will make any sense, or whether these task forces have to be at the level of state government. Don't forget that people have also said, that the local authorities in those areas that are usually affected have been compromised. And so you find that you cannot go and report to the police. You find that you cannot report to the local government chairman. And in some instances, state authorities who need to know about these things know about it and have already been compromised as well. These are the allegations. So I believe that if we're going to set up a task force, whether at the national level or asking the cooperation of state governors in this matter, I'm not very certain if I know that labor matters are either concurrent or exclusive, which is something that is still a bit of a debate. We usually hear it when it comes to, minimum matters of minimum wage. But it will be worthwhile for us to explore, because it is very heartbreaking to see the sort of pictures that we see. It's very heartbreaking to continue to hear the stories that we hear of our fellow citizens, of our fellow men and women being treated in such an inhuman manner in their own country. They haven't traveled anywhere only and simply because they're looking to earn a living. I mean, it is unacceptable. And I think that these are suggestions that we can, bring on board. First and foremost, to ask the Minister of Labour, are you aware that these practices exist? What are the challenges facing the Ministry of Labour in enforcing the rules of minimum wage engagement, minimum decent living and working conditions? What are the challenges that you face, and how can we begin to take it more seriously? I know that our challenges are many. Security is topmost, welfare of the people is also, but this is under welfare. You cannot say that if at the end of the day people have jobs and they're being treated like slaves in their places of work. It is something that should concern every single Nigerian, and make us look for solutions that will work at the end of the day.
Oh, yes, indeed. I think the Army may be interested as well, because there are allegations and images online as well that some of these security agencies, including some members of the Army, have been pliable. They are being used to dehumanize some of these members of staff. So whilst that investigation goes on, yeah, I mean, since they also say they've got CCTV almost everywhere in the company, they could request for images as well and see what has been going on. This certainly cannot allow this to keep going on, because I don't see any Nigerian company trying some of these things elsewhere without them clamping down on you. It's not even right. It doesn't matter who. It's not just right. So they were hoping that Abia State government, the police, the army, the consumer protection, labor, in fact, they accused the NLC in the state, the chapter, of looking the other way. Maybe NLC at the hierarchy there may also equally look into this and say that this is stopped. All right, so we'll be back and take a look at how the dailies are reflecting matters of the nation. All right, let's take you through some of the dailies. We'll start with Nigerian Tribune today. Budget. FG spends 1.57 trillion naira on debt servicing, 1.61 trillion naira on personnel, pension. Releases 1 trillion naira for capital projects. Proposes $40 oil benchmark for 2021 fiscal year, as finance minister warns of possible recession. Oh dear, you hear this every now and then again, don't you? But yeah, that's what they're talking about now. So you might as well just pay attention and take some very financial decisions, wise financial advice, so that you could plan for some of these things and don't carry on as though it's business as usual. Well, it appears to be business unusual for this one. NBC's hate speech prohibition code offensive to free speech, ascribed to Atiku, as radio station is fined 5 million naira for hate speech. And it's been generating a lot of reactions as well as to whether or not that should be allowed to stand. Can it stand? The NBC board themselves speaking up as well. You might have caught that in the news yesterday, saying no, they're not aware. The minister acted alone on this one. So, keeping close tabs on it. Look at the back page of Tribune. Barca, Bayern showdown. We must show our quality. Lewandowski. It'll be a difficult game, Griezmann. And what a game it was yesterday, by the way. After PSG, came through with Atalanta, having, trailed Atalanta by a goal to 2 quick goals in the dying minute. And then Atleti, they crashed out to Leipzig 2-1 on the day. Oh boy. Just something to keep you, up there in case you love football. That's Tribune anyway.
Maybe you should join sports today at 9 this morning.
Nope. Thanks, but no thanks.
Well, the Guardian newspaper is next, and it leads with delayed bailout unsettles aviation health sectors. That's the lead story of the Guardian newspaper this morning. Stakeholders lament, blame inconsistent policy. Less than 5% CBN credit approved. This definitely is something giving some concern. health sector plight compounded by importation. Now, the issue of the delayed bailout is something that's definitely, because everyone knows that the aviation sector is critically hit, because the education sector as well, but health sectors, because they have been working and they are still working, heavily laden right now. Right under the picture you see on the front page, why 90% local insurers lose big risks to foreign underwriters. Operators tie sector survival to government policy. Insurers doubt FGN's 1 trillion naira premium benchmark. That story continues on page 6 of the Guardian newspaper this morning. And that red box there, NBC board overrules minister on broadcasting code. Find the details of that on page 3 of the Guardian newspaper this morning. Okay.
Well, let's see if we can quickly take a look at the Vanguard for you. You see right on the front page, a bit of politics there. Obaseki, Oshomale's men at war over attack on convoy. That's the lead story they have there. Obaseki Izeyamo battle for monarch's blessings, gets titles. Bode George blasts Fayose over remarks on Obaseki. Obo, ADC candidate, challenges Obaseki Izeyamo to debate. Yeah, we're hoping we'll see one of that, at this elections. INEC to deploy 20,000 ad hoc staff for polls. That's on page 9 of the paper as well. You also have a number of other stories there. COVID-19, Lagos records 69 new infections as confirmed cases rise to 48,116. It's on page 41 of the paper. There was also some briefing yesterday from the PTF saying that, we've seen a decrease in the number of COVID-19 cases, but that's not because infection rate is reduced. That's because they're not getting as many samples as they ought to be getting. So let's see how they're able to ramp up testing across the country to be sure that we're actually, the infection rate could be, as a matter of fact, reducing. Let's look at this one now. Federal government moves to end U.S. visa restrictions on Nigeria. Find out how they're doing that. How ex-AGF Adoke gave me $2.2 million cash to repay bank loan, that's according to a witness. Workers reject Unilag VC's removal. There was a protest yesterday. Nigeria studying Russia's vaccine claims, says federal government. Melafia's Boko Haram claims. MBC slams 5 million naira fine on radio station. MBC board chair disowns broadcast code. Yeah, indeed, that story broke yesterday on page 7. It's on page 7 of the Vanguard newspapers. A number of other stories there for you, which I might leave you to do by yourself. But if I flip to the back page before sports lovers have my head on a platter, looking at the back page there, you see sports, Champions League showdown, fireworks as Barca battled Bayern tonight. Ronaldo's inner circle deny Barca links. That's what they say. William, that's according to for transfer. William becomes a gunner tomorrow. And Ozil, nobody can force me out of Arsenal. On a number of other stories there. Let's look at this local one. Eagles Raw awaits FIFA's approval for September friendlies. So who knows? We could be seeing some international football as early as September. Who knows? Fingers crossed. Let's leave it there for Vanguard and Vanguard Sports.
Yeah, 5 out of 5 for you, Mark, by this morning on that one, even though you didn't go to Mr. and Mrs. But no worries. Take a look at Daily Trust next here today. Amidst dwindling revenue, weak Naira, FG says economy faces fresh hurdles. Nigeria vulnerable to further forex crisis. Experts proffer solutions. Haven't we always been vulnerable? Because of the nature of the economy, the cash cow. Maybe not cash cow, but the kind of economy we do have. If oil prices fluctuate, the economy always takes a hit.
Perhaps also because it's difficult. It seems like it's been difficult for us over the years. Every effort to diversify, we seem to be talking about the same thing over and over again.
Well, our lexicon in Nigeria, who knows if it might just be with us forever and mean different things to different people. Because if you look at the results of that, you just wonder. But yeah, it is the big one on the front page here this morning. And then, let me just look at that one right above it. FG dumps national identity card. So if you're having a headache trying to get that card, or if you did go through a lot to get the card, this is the latest perspective now. I said the card is the plastic card. It's just for convenience. It's the number you need. So they're migrating to something else. But part of the story also said, look, it's expensive to continue with, and so it costs us a lot of forex. And you say, did we know this before we went into it in the first place? What is wrong with people? Oh boy.
Well, now they're talking about unifying all the data that we have. Yeah, perhaps a good way to look at it.
It's not a conversation that started 2-3 years ago. It's
Exactly.
been every decades, and we. Okay, well, because it sounds like, look, what happens to all of the plans? Don't we have rolling plans, don't we? We extrapolate, we look ahead. We should have known some of these things, but it is where they are today. And then I got my information on Boko Haram from traders. May Lafia apologizes over comment and then knocks at NBC slams 5 million naira fine on radio station. So that is also featuring there. So interesting, isn't it?
The Daily Times newspaper this morning leads with energy initiatives delay kills firms. Find that story on page 4 of the paper this morning. Whatever that means, you'll find the details. That picture is of some security agencies and the Plateau State governor burning counterfeit drugs seized by the NDLEA in Jos, Plateau State. So many questions you may want to ask about that, but check the inside stories if there is any on that one. And the insecurity, eyes on the northern governors over alleged complicity in Boko Haram terrorism. Find out the details of that. On health, how to boost investment in technology, health, others for COVID-19 pushback. The story is on page 4. And Chinese loan, is China Transport Infrastructure Development Loan beneficial to Nigeria? That story is on page 7 and definitely worth a read. And of course, right above the nameplate editorial, time to review federal character principles. That story continues on page 3, the editorial page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning.
Okay, so there you go. That wraps it up with a look at some of the dailies here today. We're back in a moment. Stay with us.
Fake news, hate speech, they are very subjective terminologies, and one has to be very careful because some people will take criticism as hate speech. Criticism is not hate speech. It is when somebody is saying something that is really defamatory and all of that, that you can say is wrong. Even at that, the laws are there. Even the old defamation law of 1961 is still valid today. It has not been abrogated. The provisions are there for what you say. When what a station is saying is true, you cannot be saying you are defamed because the truth cannot defame you.
do not think that the challenge has to do with ethnicity, federal representation, and all that. For me, the number one problem is the lack of political will on the side of those who have responsibility. Government always has all the intelligence it requires. But in Nigeria, many of our politicians and those in top government positions are more interested in protecting the interests of the part of this country that they come from.
All right, so there you have some members of the University of Lagos, the unions there marching in solidarity with the Vice Chancellor. Well, now that's a controversy now because there are reports that, they had announced, the council had announced that he was removed. That's the governing council. Now, these unions made up of ASU, SANU, the National Association of Academic Technologists, NASU, both of the University of Lagos and the Unilag branch, all pulling together, saying that that is not the way to go. Now, the council, after that meeting held on Wednesday in the NUC in Abuja, in the nation's capital, the ministry at the moment, the Ministry of Education, saying that they're not aware, they haven't gotten any updates or brief on that particular matter. So there was a Congress meeting that held yesterday about this, and they came up with a communique which roundly condemned the removal of the Vice Chancellor, saying that that is not right. But they've since announced an acting Vice Chancellor, someone to act in that capacity. So they are at loggerheads at the moment concerning what is the way forward. Different parties holding their grounds on the matter. Well, to give us some perspective on what transpired yesterday, and perhaps beyond, we've got Dr. Dele Ashiru, who is the Unilag chapter chairman of ASU. He joins us this morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Well, at the moment, it appears no let-up on this entire matter. That Congress that held yesterday, was the Congress abreast of all of those issues? Because there are reports indicating the contrary. But first of all, give us the current position. Is the Congress still sticking with their position on saying no to the removal of Professor Ogundipe? Okay, so we will try and get that back, and then get him to give his perspective. So if you can hear me, could you go ahead? Is the Congress, are the union still sticking to the grounds that the removal of Professor Ogundipe didn't go through the process?
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. At the end of our Congress yesterday, as it has been reported, it was made abundantly clear that the processes leading to the removal of the Vice Chancellor was not only illegal, it was lawless. The act establishing the university and the miscellaneous provisions, Universities Miscellaneous Provisions Act, which empowered council to hire and fire, also stipulated a procedure for firing a vice chancellor. The contention of the University of Lagos Senate and that of all the unions on campus is that that procedure has not been followed. In fact, the purported appointment of an acting vice chancellor also has not followed the due process, because what the law says is that council must take recommendation from Senate on who to be appointed as an acting vice chancellor. That also has not been done. So as far as unions in the university is concerned, as far as the University of Lagos Senate is concerned, the purported removal of the vice chancellor is illegal and is unacceptable, and we call on government to
Okay, well, system just seems to be freezing on us. But Dr. Ashiru, now what happens? So, could you talk to us about the reasons that was adduced concerning this announcement? Because they say there are grave allegations against not just him, but some other members that were affected before this announcement.
Well, the reasons that were adduced were that the vice chancellor was alleged of misconduct, abuse of office, financial recklessness, etc. But the contention of our union and that of other stakeholders is that, yes, the holder, the occupier of an office can be accused, can be alleged to have done things that are against the regulations of the university. And ASU and other unions are not against the processes of disciplining any erring officer of the university. But we cannot resort to jungle justice. We cannot resort to a situation where people will do as they choose without recourse to the law. And that is why we are saying that if Chancellor has been committed offenses, the best thing to do is to take him through the disciplinary processes as enshrined in the law of the university. That an individual will sit in judgment, he will be the accuser, he will be the prosecutor, and the judge at the same time would be a recipe for anarchy. And that is why we are saying that if the council feels very strongly that Professor Toyin Ogundi committed any, he so tried so that it will be clear to everybody that he's been given a chance to defend himself according to the provisions of the law. And if so found guilty, the appropriate disciplinary measure as enshrined in the law can be meted out to him.
Now, we are also all aware that the Governing Council has since announced Professor Soyombo as acting VC. And of course, you have said, and of course, Professor Ogundikwe has also said that he is still the substantive Vice Chancellor. At this moment, who is in office?
Well, by the resolution of Senate, and Senate is the highest decision-making organ of the university. By that resolution, Professor Toyin Ogundikwe remains the subsisting Vice Chancellor in the University of Lagos. Even the law that empowers the council to appoint somebody in acting capacity provides that Senate will give that recommendation. In all of these matters, the council has not consulted Senate in any form, and it is characteristic of the Wale Babalakin-led council to flagrantly, violate regulations and show contempt and disdain for the university Senate. Such a mindset is not the type that can move Nigerian university education forward.
When you say it is characteristic, since when?
since inception in office. Indeed, I can give you about 2-3 examples of instances where Dr. Wale Babalaki had denigrated the University Senate. The first, of course, was the decision to step down a Senate recommendation to appoint Professor Dele Olowo-Kudejo as a distinguished professor of the university. Indeed, he wrote a very rude letter. I mean, Dr. Wale Babalaki wrote an extremely rude letter to the University Senate. Not only that, when the convocation ceremonies of the University of Lagos were also unilaterally cancelled by him, and Senate organized a special meeting to prevail on him to reconsider his position.
The reports that we have, just one moment, Dr. Shuru. The report we have, especially of the last issue that you just raised, is that cancellation or postponement of the convocation ceremonies came from the Ministry of Education, especially the minister, and not the chairman of the governing council. So at what point do you now say that it is Dr. Wale Babalaki?
That is correct. But that is correct. But why did the ministry cancel the convocation? Dr. Wale Babalaki wrote to the ministry to say that council had not been informed about the university's convocation.
Okay, but Dr. Ashiru,
presiding over council and approved.
But it does appear as though there's an axe to grind with Dr. Babalaki, but because if it was the ministry that had that announcement, how then do you come to the conclusion that it was a unilateral decision after the ministry took that decision? Wouldn't they have considered the processes before they eventually decided to take their own decision?
Thank you very much. That is a very brilliant question. In the letter conveying the cancellation of the convocation ceremony, it was clearly stated there the reason why. And what they said was that the pro-chancellor said he had not been informed about the convocation ceremonies. This is contrary to what was documented in the minutes of the council meetings that we have. And the evidence are there in the university to prove the position of Dr. Wale Babalaki to be false.
So, concerning this situation as it is right now, it's certainly not what the students or the academic community will want to see, because they want to see education moving forward. Now, if the Ministry of Education says, well, we've equally looked at this and we're sticking with that decision, what then happens?
Well, the visitor is the one statutorily allowed by law to take such decisions, which is the president. We are confident that the ministry will examine the illegality in the processes leading to the removal of the vice chancellor and do what is right in the interest of justice, in the interest of the rule of law. The bone of contention actually is that the process of removing the vice chancellor was fraught with a lot of illegalities. And I'm sure the ministry is conscious of this fact. We are confident that we will get justice from the ministry, and we are sure that it will be in the interest of the Nigerian education system to defend the rule of law and the processes in the Nigerian university system.
Jemlin just talked about the university community and, of course, the students as well. I mean, hearing all of this, in your opinion, how are the students taking this? How far-reaching is the impact of all of this that's happening on this university community, especially the students?
Well, certainly it would have a very devastating effect on our students because when students are made to learn under a dictatorial and tyrannical environment, it leaves a lasting impression. And that is why it is the opinion of our union that this crisis in Unilag, perennial as it appears since Babalakin became pro-chancellor, was needless and could have been avoided. And that is why it has become imperative for the relevant agencies of government to intervene in this crisis in the interest of the rule of law and in the interest of the university community and our students.
Has the unions, your union and a number of others that have been a part of this conversation over time, what have you done to try to mitigate between the, especially the major warring parties, to make sure it doesn't get this far in the first place?
Another very brilliant question. The first was that our union set up a committee of 5 to intervene with the pro-chancellor when this crisis started brewing. We met the pro-chancellor in his chamber on the island. He gave a lot of promises. He told us he was going to do all he could to avert this crisis situation. Immediately after that meeting, the pro-chancellor reneged on all the promises he gave. The leadership of our union will call him, he will not pick. We will send text messages to him, he will not reply. You will send emails to him, he will never reply. The Alumni Association of the university had intervened severally.
Well, it would be really nice to hear what the Alumni Association has done, because, over the years, one would expect that, maybe some intervention at that level would have gone on, seeing that there are quite a number of prominent and well-meaning Nigerians who have passed through the university system. It will also be, a good idea to find out what the law says about this. Find someone to, give us a perspective.
Well, yeah, but before that, whilst we're getting back, we'd like him to equally respond to, because the joint communique, which they put up yesterday, they listed certain grounds that were not satisfied. So, Dr. Ashiru, that joint communique that was issued yesterday by the Congress, some of the conditions there was that while you were dissatisfied is that there wasn't any report that was published about any findings whatsoever. Is it that you didn't receive the report, or they didn't see any report, or there was no report whatsoever? Because if you look through here, there are reports which say that, talking about the findings, the audit findings of that committee, which the 9-member subcommittee of the council, which was led by a lecturer of chemistry at Tafawa Balewa University, Bauchi, which came up with some findings. So are you privy to this before that
yes,
communique came through?
Thank you very much. There was is the right to dig out facts. The Dogara committee found out that there were, according to the report, infractions by the university management in terms of management of finances and all that. Now, that by the law is the first step. An allegation has been established. What the law now says is that the council will now officially inform the vice chancellor that you have been alleged to have done 1 misconduct, 2, 3, 4. After that, the council will now set up a joint committee of council and senate of the university, who will now give the senate, who will now give that investigative committee the mandate to invite the vice chancellor to respond to these allegations. The law provides that the Vice Chancellor can even come to that panel with his own lawyer. After that investigation, a report must now go back to council. After the deliberation of that report, council will now decide in its wisdom whether a case has been established against the Vice Chancellor. It is only after that that council will now decide on what disciplinary measure to make out to the Vice Chancellor, either to suspend him or to remove him or to carry out any other disciplinary measure as may be deemed fit by council. All of these processes have not been followed.
But Dr. Ashiru, the thing is, if you're aware of that report, how then did this communique indicate that there was no formal report from any investigative committee?
Yeah, what we are saying, you seem not to get.
And it keeps coming in broken. I guess we're missing some part of your submissions. Okay, so we'll just try and reconnect so we can get the full text of his submissions, because it's not too clear what he said, because I'm trying to understand his point of view, if they are privy of that report, or if that report didn't still go through all of the processes as a result is inchoate. So just want him to explain that context. Right? I think it's a contextual matter. So.
Well, while that is valid, the laws are very clear on what the processes should be. If all of this is going on, yeah.
But if there's a report, maybe he was talking about subjecting it to processes as well. So okay. Who knows? But you were talking about getting a legal perspective on this matter. All right.
It's essential. So we have Ebonlu Adegborough, SAN, joining us to give some perspective on all of this. You are aware, thanks for joining us, you are aware of all of this that's happening as far as the removal of the Unilag VC is concerned. Could you shed some light on what the legal process should be, whatever law it is that you would want to quote, because many people are saying that it didn't go through the proper process. What's your take?
Thank you very much. Good morning. The events going on at the University of Lagos concerning the Vice Chancellor, I would say with all due respect, is most unfortunate. And having regard to the struggles of students, academic and non-academic staff of the universities this many years, we never expected that we'll get to a level where we will still be entertaining dictatorship within the university system. What has gone on at the University of Lagos can only be described as a total charade. There's no place in law at all, or even in morality. Now, the law governing the removal of a vice chancellor has been unified throughout all universities, not just University of Lagos. And that law came in 2003, the Universities Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2003. And in this regard, Section 3, sub 8, sub 9, 10, and 11. And the procedure is so very simple, even to a non-lawyer. If you want to remove a vice chancellor, because the vice chancellor is the person who is next in authority to the pro-chancellor. So he's the academic chief executive of the institution. If you need to remove that person who is the brain and head of that institution, the process is very simple. It can only be initiated by 3 people: the council of the university, the senate of the university, or the congregation of the university. And the process of initiation is that you will sign a document indicating that you intend to remove the vice chancellor. The document will be authored to be signed by either members of council, members of senate, or members of the congregation. After signing that document and submitting it to the council will then set up a joint committee. That joint committee will comprise 3 members of council, 3 members of the senate, 2 members of the senate, making 5 persons. The member of council will head that committee, and the terms of reference will be to investigate allegations of gross misconduct against the vice chancellor. When that committee is set up, the committee will then draft allegations and give to the vice chancellor and give him an opportunity to respond to those allegations. The vice chancellor can do so through a written response or do so through a legal practitioner. After the committee has taken the response of the Vice Chancellor, the committee will then make a finding and make a recommendation back to council. The council will then convene a meeting and still invite the Vice Chancellor to respond to the recommendations of the subcommittee. Then the council will then convene another meeting and take a decision whether or not to remove the Vice Chancellor. After a decision has been taken, the council will then communicate to the visitor of the university, who is the president. And the president will then wait and call upon the Vice Chancellor, because the Vice Chancellor has a right of appeal against the decision of the council. Both the Vice Chancellor and the council will wait for the president to determine the appeal of the Vice Chancellor. It is after all this process, you can then announce whether the Vice Chancellor has been removed or not. Now, what happened in the University of Lagos? On the 10th of this month, October or of August, the registrar of the council issued out a notice saying that the chairman of council had directed him to convene an emergency meeting of council for the 12th of August. Under the standing orders of the University of Lagos Council, an emergency meeting is only meant to determine minor issues. Minor issues. There shall be no resolution. There shall be no decision taken at any emergency meeting. The same council that made its own standing orders. And now, according to the standing order of that council, if you want to convene an emergency meeting of the council, you must take the agenda and list the issues to be discussed. It was the Vice Chancellor that wrote a letter to the chairman of council requesting for an emergency meeting to consider the issue of budget. Because the council has not been meeting, convocation was suspended, the university is not running. And so they said, we can't be spending money unless there's approval by council. So this meeting was supposed to be convened to consider the issue of budget of the university. And that meeting was convened for Abuja because the chairman of council had been declared personal grantor by the whole university community. He's a lone ranger. So when they got to Abuja for this emergency meeting, note what I said, emergency meeting, the chairman of council then got up and said there's no reason to discuss anything. What they want to discuss is the issue of a report of a committee. So he asked the Vice Chancellor to leave the meeting. The Vice Chancellor protested and said, we are here to discuss the issue of budget. He insisted. And then he told the Deputy Vice Chancellor to also leave the meeting. Then council members then protested and said, we're not here for all this. What is this drama? We're here for budget. Anyway, in order not to cause commotion, the Vice Chancellor left the meeting as an obedient citizen. The Deputy Vice Chancellor left the meeting. And thereafter, the chairman of council then called upon a member to present a report. The report was presented, and the chairman said, let us vote to remove the Vice Chancellor. And the member said, what are you talking about? We're not here for removal of Vice Chancellor. This is an emergency meeting of council. And the chairman then went out and came back and gave them his phone number. The standing order of the University of Lagos Council says if you want to vote in the council meeting, it will be by show of hands or by secret ballot. Everybody must be present. The chairman will then preside over that meeting to know the outcome of the vote. But in this case, the Vice Chancellor gave them the chairman of council gave them his phone number and said members should indicate their choice through WhatsApp message to him. So he left the meeting. And then people were then sending messages to him, and he came back and said he has taken a decision. People voted for the removal, so we are removing the Vice Chancellor. And said the meeting will reconvene by 5 o'clock. Let me finish. He said the meeting will reconvene by 5 o'clock to appoint an acting Vice Chancellor. Now, Chamberlain, with all due respect, under the law setting up the university, if you remove a Vice Chancellor, you must inform the university of community, the Senate, the congregation, that is, who are the owners and the people in the university. The Senate will then meet, and according to Section 3 of 11 of the University Miscellaneous Act, the Senate will recommend to the council the person to be appointed as the acting Vice Chancellor. The same day the council purported to remove the Vice Chancellor, without information to the Senate, without any meeting to anybody, it then purported to announce a Vice Chancellor, causing total crisis in that university. This university that is one of the best in Nigeria.
This has been on for a while. The Ministry of Education, there hasn't been any decision taken by them at the moment. How should they be approaching this?
I think the matter is very straightforward. The federal government cannot maintain any silence in this matter because we're talking about the destiny of youth and the leaders of this nation. The federal government has already issued a release through the Ministry of Education that they are waiting to be briefed because according to the law setting up University of Lagos, there are 4 members of the federal government who must be in the council. There must be a representative of the Minister of Education. When that representative got to that meeting, Dr. Babalakin refused to allow him to participate, claiming that he came late. So even the federal government was not allowed to even be part of the meeting. And this cannot happen. So I'm advising the federal government, first of all, to look at the composition of that council. In that council of the University of Lagos, one of the best universities in Nigeria, Dr. Babalakin has a member of his chambers sitting on the council, said to be representing Rivers State when that person is from Ekiti State. We can't continue like this. The federal government can't maintain any silence. They must look into the University of Lagos and dissolve that council and allow the proper method of law to take place. That is my advice to the federal government. They should dissolve the council.
All right, then. We do thank you very much indeed for your thoughts this morning, Ebunlo Adegboro, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Well, let's get back. Dr. Ashuri was just trying to clarify the context of his submissions about whether or not the report that is out there has any bearing in terms of either the processes or authenticity. Dr. Ashuri, could you go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you very much. The point I try to make is that the report in question is not the report in the face of the law. It's not the report that the law envisaged that will cause the removal of the Vice Chancellor. The learned Silk, who just spoke, had explained explicitly what the law says about the removal of a Vice Chancellor. The first report under reference is a fact-finding committee report of council. It is only after then that an official letter will be written to the Vice Chancellor notifying him of those infractions. And the processes will then follow, as has been explained by Barrister Ebunlo Adegboro, SAN.
Okay. So at the moment now, what would you suggest as, because if the acting Vice Chancellor continues to act in that stead, and this is a stalemate, or should we just wait this out because we understand Professor Ogundigbe has gone to court on this matter?
As far as the law is concerned, there's no acting Vice Chancellor in Unilag. Because what the law says is that an acting Vice Chancellor can only be appointed on the recommendation of the Senate. As I speak with you, the Senate of the University of Lagos has not been officially informed either of the removal of Professor Toyin Ogundigbe or the appointment of an acting Vice Chancellor. So, as far as the University of Lagos Senate and community is concerned, there's nobody like an acting Vice Chancellor.
All right. Okay, Doc.
Our recommendation is that it is clear that the Wale Babalakin-led council is a lawless council. And the federal government cannot be seen to be supporting illegality and violation of the rule of law. And that's why we are saying that government should order a status quo ante. We should go back to the situation in Unilag before this illegal council meeting.
All right, Dr. Ashuru, we do appreciate your thoughts this morning, but we'll hopefully wait and see how this is eventually sorted, because this is not the way this should go down. But we did reach out to the council chair. We haven't gotten any response at the moment, whether or not they want to get their perspectives out there. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.
If there is any falsehood that the Nigerian people have swallowed, is the indivisibility or the facade, that, oh, the military is one entity that, cannot be divided. That's not true. In fact, it is that same institution that is deeply divided, if we would speak the truth. Because if you are going to get the solutions to your problems, you would better come out clear and speak them out.
All right, welcome back. Well, we're talking security now. Well, yeah, we all do know. Lots of meetings have been held, and but the thing about this is the figures. Let's look at some of these figures. What do they tell us? And perhaps it could be a guide to what we should be doing moving forward. So we've got Babajide Ogunsaro, data analyst. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning, Chamberlain.
Well, it's not just the spendings for security and the budget spendings or the security votes that have to do with numbers, but what have we been doing in terms of how have we approached this? What do you see? Do you see a pattern in the numbers that you've looked on behind the scenes?
There's a lot to talk about if we have enough time, but I'd like to start with the theory first, and then we'll look at the numbers, because with security, I've been trying to look at how can we simplify it. And I think for me, this represents the security problem in Nigeria, the Rubik's Cube. If you focus on this, you will ask yourself, how do you solve this? There's a world record, and I'll share the world record with you. But no matter how complex this is, the only solution to this is to first understand the problem. To understand the technique, and then you'll be able to solve it. But no matter how much you focus on this, if you don't understand the problem, if you don't know the technique, you will never get the solution.
And you can't throw money to solve the problem.
No, you can't throw money to solve the problem. And Peter Drucker, the renowned management consultant, had said erroneous assumptions are dangerous. This morning, I'd like to talk about top 3 things that no one has really told you about regarding the security situation, and then we'll go into the numbers. So, because it allows us to understand the problem. The first is, I'd like to talk about one local government in Adamawa State called Song. That's the first thing I'd like to talk about. Now, Song is just one of 21 local governments in Adamawa State. But have you heard that just this local government, Song, is larger than the size of Lagos State? Just one local government in that state where you have a lot of terrorists. Now, that isn't the point. The point is, Song is not even the largest local government in Adamawa State. Yeah. That's the first point, and I want you to think about the implications of that. The second is in Borno State. Borno State, with its land area of 75,000 square kilometers. Now, Borno State is larger than Ogun, Oyo, Osun, Ondo, and Ekiti State combined. Statement of fact. That is another state that the war is going on. Let's talk about Yobe, the third state that there's severe insecurity. Yobe State is larger than all the 5 states in the southeast region combined. Now, what I'm saying is, there are some local governments in Nigeria that are bigger than states. There are some states that are bigger than regions.
So that gives us an idea of if you need to marshal out your security strategy or plan or architecture in terms of deployment, that is the kind of size you're looking at.
There are some regions that are bigger than countries. The northeastern region is bigger, way bigger than Ghana. And so it allows us to understand that the size is a major problem. If I were to summarize it, I would say our ungoverned spaces plus underdevelopment is husband and wife, and they've given birth to a child. Ungoverned spaces and underdevelopment has given birth to a child called poverty. Now, poverty has given birth to many children, grandchildren, and it now has great-grandchildren. So that allows us to understand the problem.
Before you veer off that for a bit, on the one hand are these ungoverned spaces, but then you want to look at the population of those spaces that are ungoverned. Isn't it relevant?
It is relevant, and the population leads us to that discussion on poverty, Chamberlain. Because the evidence we have today shows that all the states in the northwestern region, without exception, have a poverty rate of above 40%. All the states in the northeastern region have a poverty rate of above 50%. And the north central is sandwiched by two regions that have extreme poverty. And that allows us to really understand the challenges that we face. We are quick to throw a solution that, let's change the service chiefs. But the evidence, Chamberlain, shows that thinking is obsolete. What do I mean? Since this war started in 2001, the evidence shows that we've had 8 chief of naval staffs, we have had 8 chief of air staff, we have had 9 chief of army staffs, we've had 9 chief of defense staffs. In other words, since 2001, we've had 34 senior military officers. Yet, the war still goes on. So the thinking of we changing service chiefs or changing the military every time we have a problem, the evidence shows the war is still going on. And so our thinking has become that which is similar to the Choluteca River. And I'm sure you've heard that story whereby what was thought to have become a solution quickly became obsolete. And I think you should read up on the Choluteca River story.
Don't forget that argument notwithstanding, there's a natural progression of laws, promotions, graduations, which should take its natural course. Whether or not the unilaterally want to change that, but that stays on its own. But let's bring it back down a little bit. 2015, you looked at the global terrorist report in terms of the attacks. What did you see?
So we could start from 2015, or we could start from even understanding what is going on globally, how other countries have fought their wars. And if we focus on that, to look at how much countries invested whenever they found themselves in wartime. Now, once we focus on that, here's what you notice. Focusing on those top 10 countries you had mentioned, Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Since 2015 to 2018, these are the top 10 countries that have seen the most terrorist attacks. Nigeria is ranked number 6 among the top 10 countries that have had the most terrorist attacks since 2015, with over 2,000 terrorist attacks since 2015. We have Iraq number 1, Afghanistan number 2, and then we also have India, Philippines, and other countries on that list. But the challenge is the rate at which terrorism is growing makes us think, what are the alternative solutions? Because like it said, it's important for there to be progression, but the evidence shows that perhaps the change isn't really what we should focus on. We should focus on the problems. And what we've seen is the next thing, which is we are underfunding the war on terrorism. And so countries, in the United States, in World War I, World War II, 1939 to 1945, the evidence showed that when that war started, between 1939 to 1945, the United States spent up to 40% of their GDP on military expenditure. You heard me right. The United Kingdom spent 42% of their GDP on military expenditure. During the Second World War, Japan spent 99% of their GDP on military expenditure.
The challenge here is, those are the issues. But then we are not in a war right now, but we are having insurgency and all of those things. So there are other agencies of government fighting security other than the military, and how come it seems like we're paying more attention to those?
Because the military seems to have been the last resort. It's our last resort. And the challenge is, if the previous solutions hadn't worked, the emphasis should have been on the police. But because the National Bureau of Statistics released a report about 2 years ago that showed the police as being one of the institutions Nigerians ranked as being highly corrupt. So the police is suffering from a trust deficit. And that trust deficit, that gap hasn't been closed. And so we've turned and moved our focus from the police to the armed forces. But the armed forces too have challenges. The land area, ungoverned spaces, that isn't their primary responsibility to develop the spaces. Poverty, illiteracy, we have weak borders. So there are several functions that are not direct functions of the military that they have become involved in. And let's not forget that in 2001, when this war started, we had a capacity problem. Let's say it as it is. The evidence shows that the armed forces were not equipped. They didn't have that skills. The soldiers, the naval officers, the Air Force staff, they didn't have the skills to fight this sort of guerrilla warfare.
Did this start indicate that General Abacha's time actually spent 6% of our military expenditure in terms of the GDP? Is that saying he spent more than all of this combined?
Yeah, so
separately?
So what the evidence from the World Bank and our World in Data NGOs have shown is that General Abacha spent the most so far on military expenditure. So during his period, 1994 to 1998, 6% of Nigeria's GDP was on military expenditure. But what we've seen consistently is, if you look at that bottom red, the evidence is that military presidents spent more on military equipments than civilian presidents. From President Obasanjo to President Umaru Yar'Adua to President Jonathan to the sitting presidents, at the most, only 1% of GDP goes on military expenditure.
That's curious, given that we fought a war and it wasn't Abacha that was at the top, there was gone.
So what this also shows is that with military presidents, because they're not following the constitution, they can direct funds based on their preferences. In the civilian, with democracy, there are other ministries that are fighting for resources. And so a civilian president doesn't have as much flexibility to invest in military expenditure, especially in Nigeria, where even the revenue to the federal government and to the federation has been on the decline. And that is one major problem. Like I said, during the war the United States faced in World War II, 40% of GDP went on military. Now we're facing insurgents, we're facing a war. We are struggling to invest 1% in the military. And that is a challenge.
All right. We'll come back and conclude and find out, could they have done more? That's when we return. Stay with us.
The men under arms are too few. The battle space for in the northeast is too big. Borno State is bigger than Belgium. Sambisa Forest is bigger than Lagos, Ikorodu, Ekpe, and Badagry. How many men are you putting there? Now they have super camps, so certain areas are protected. Between the super camps, there are large expanse of land that is not governed. So for me, if you do not at least double the strength of those soldiers, you will fight until eternity.
All right, welcome back. Well, Jide, looking at this, it raises a lot of questions for people because many would have thought, so all of this, trillions that they see being approved for the president by National Assembly, they would have thought, wait a minute, that's a huge chunk of money that is being supposed to reflect on this military spend.
Yeah, Chamberlain.
We're not talking about the result anyway.
Chamberlain, about 5 years ago, we were here together and I referred to the Nigerian budget as chicken change. I still stand by it. Our budget we shouldn't be talking about a 10 trillion naira budget. For the size of the country, for the size of the problems we face relative to what other developed nations are doing per person, per capita, we should be talking now about 100 trillion naira budget, a 200 trillion naira budget. And so the budget for every ministry of Nigeria in Nigeria is chicken change. The budget of the Ministry of Defense is chicken change. Oh yes, you had mentioned the Civil War. Gowon spent about 3% of Nigeria's GDP. If you look at the amount of money that went into the Civil War between 1967 to 1970, approximately 3%, that was the value of GDP, went to
that was
military.
The oil boom.
And that was the oil
when they
boom.
spoke about money was not the problem.
But consistently, since 2001 that the war started, Nigeria has been spending below 1% every year on military expenditure relative to the size of the GDP.
It's also curious, sorry, Jiditu, but it's also curious that during the military, we spent more. But during civilian rule, we spent so much less. What's responsible for that?
Even former military men in civilian guard.
Yes.
Because during the civilian rule, all revenue has declined. We haven't been able to get other sources of revenue. Population has increased. Infrastructure decay has happened. And several other ministries are jostling for funds. And so every leader is faced with a lower pool of funds and more needs. And so the allocation to the Ministry of Defense is also being challenged by the need to spend on other ministries. But let's, by no stretch of the imagination, make mistakes by saying that the problem to Nigeria's, or the solution to Nigeria's problem, is only the lack of funding. Like the Rubik's Cube, the solution is to first understand the problem and understand the technique. This, no matter how complex it is, has been solved in as little as 40 seconds.
From the figures that you've seen,
40 seconds.
Does it give you the impression that we understand the problem, and do our spending reflect so?
I'll say this, by Dan G.K. Chesterton had also said it. It's not that we cannot find the solution. It is that we cannot see the problem. And the problem is complex. And we need to understand the technique. We need to understand that there are several moving parts. Leadership, yes, is one moving part, but leadership is not only the moving part. There's poverty, there are ungoverned spaces, there's skill gap, there's capacity, there's corruption, there's a lot, and there are issues. So, but once we can focus and understand that the problem isn't just limited to one thing, then we'll understand. There was a time, there was a nightclub in Brazil some years ago that caught fire. And almost everyone in that nightclub died. And that was because everybody was trying to run out of only one entrance. Now, the moral of that story is that if there's only one way, if there's only one solution to a problem, very soon that solution will become the problem.
All right, then, Jide Ogunson, our data analyst, thank you for your thoughts there. And those figures, they're worth a second look. We will be back in a moment and perhaps look at more figures. Join us again. All right, welcome back. Now we've got Mr. Oliver Stolp, who is the country rep for UNODC, joining us via Zoom as well. Good morning and thank you for joining us today. Well, the UNODC have come up with a second report about corruption, which we'll look at in a moment. But could you start by telling us, why was there a need for a second report in the first place?
Well, good morning and thank you for having me. First of all, the issue is obviously corruption is a problem in Nigeria and elsewhere, and we need to keep a close track of how that problem evolves. Your previous speaker just talked about problem analysis being really at the core of finding a solution to the problems that we're dealing with. Same applies to the issue of corruption. So the reason of why there is a second report, the first report was done in 2016, the second report was done in 2019 in terms of the data collection, and we are absolutely convinced that we will also need to continue with our partners in the National Bureau of Statistics to keep an eye on the problem and probably to repeat either in 2021 or 2022 the same study in order to see how the problem has evolved. We also see, and we're very encouraged, that already some of the state governments and the state statistical institutes are starting to approach us with similar requests for similar type of studies.
Does this second indicate an improvement in the patterns and trends?
Yes, there are some encouraging signs, maybe not quite up to the level that we would all like to see it. But between 2016 and 2019, we had a statistical reduction, a statistical relevant reduction of the exposure to corruption. Basically, what we saw is that in 2016, 32% of all Nigerians that came into contact with any type of public official ended up paying a bribe. 32% that was. In 2019, that number had slightly reduced to 30%. And while that in itself may not yet sort of give really the massive rationale for optimism, there are some other findings in the report which do. One of the things that I'm particularly pleased with is that Nigerians are far more likely today to refuse requests to bribery. We also see that in particular improvements are being made in the younger stratus of the population in terms of their attitudes towards corruption. Considering corruption as never being essentially an acceptable means to achieve whatever aim one needs to achieve. And we also see quite some positive improvements with regard to specific agencies that were particularly affected by corruption. So there is some good news there. But obviously, it's far too early to basically declare victory. We need to continue and probably even reinforce all the efforts to fight and prevent corruption.
Now, what was the distinguishing feature did you notice in terms of mindsets about corruption between the 2016 report and this one? Did people seem to be on the same page? What changed?
Well, it's interesting. Now, first of all, I told you effectively corruption was reduced. However, at the same time, in terms of the perceptions, so merely the opinions of people, actually people thought that the situation had deteriorated. Also, people were, despite the improvements, less confident, essentially, in, so to speak, government having a winning strategy against corruption. So despite there were de facto improvements, people didn't seem to be quite, to the same extent, ready to acknowledge these improvements. And I think that is something very important also to communicate to Nigerians. Listen, things are getting better. It is a hard business to make progress. Probably for every step that we're doing forward, we might end up on occasion to do some steps backward. But we need to keep the eye on the ball. We need to continue the strategy. We need to improve on the strategy, no doubt. And we need to particularly start paying much closer attention to the everyday corruption, to the corruption that affects citizens directly, the policeman that asks for a bribe, the Federal Road Safety Corps person that asks for a bribe, the utility officer that asks for a bribe. We need to also look at those. We cannot just focus on the large-scale corruption. Yes, that is the one that makes the headlines, but the one that affects Nigerians directly every day that they leave their houses, or even that finds them in their own houses, is really that petty corruption. And it makes quite a significant portion of their annual salary. More than 10% Nigerians end up paying in the form of bribes every year.
Mr. Stop, so are you saying that the corruption, about this second survey, corruption experienced by the population is having a lot more impact on the people as opposed to the ones that you hear maybe public funds being allocated or stashed away somewhere, usually in huge numbers, because the mindset is people think that is affecting things a lot more. But this report doesn't show that, does it?
Well, first of all, this report doesn't, in terms of the methodology that we applied, it is not a good methodology to measure grand-scale corruption. When you want to measure grand-scale corruption, you can't go to people and ask them, have you paid a bribe? Because they will not honestly answer to that for obvious reasons. People that answer honestly to that question, have you paid a bribe, feel normally more as a victim in that exchange. And that is typically the case for the petty bribery. Also, you have to, of course, it's evident that people that engage in large-scale bribery are only a very few, actually, that have that access and control, basically, of resources that can influence a political process, that can influence large-scale procurement decisions, and so on. So they will not be showing up in a survey of the one that we did. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in terms of Nigerians suffering directly from corruption, it is when they are being victimized by corruption directly. A third of all the people that are getting into contact with the public sector end up paying a bribe. You just need to really let that message sink in, and then I guess it becomes evident of why we don't see maybe quite the level of support and enthusiasm amongst Nigerians for the anti-corruption agenda that we saw maybe 3-4 years ago.
Who pays bribes? You've talked about who takes bribes. But then some will be wondering, well, it might sound elementary, but why do people pay bribes? From your findings in the report.
Right. Well, the reasons for paying bribes are very diverse. They are, I guess everyone that is listening has their own stories and can imagine what. Typically, you want to avoid a fine. You want to get a certain administrative process going. You want to avoid any other negative or you want either to avoid negative outcomes, or you want to achieve a positive outcome in your interaction with the state. And that's what it boils down to. There are different reasons, of course, that a lot of the bribes are being paid to the same types of public officials, essentially in the same type of transactions. The one group of public officials are the public officials that provide essentially security on our streets and roads. And those ones are unfortunately quite often engaged in the collection of micro bribes. And actually, when you take them all together, more than 50% of all the bribes that are being paid, merely talking numerically in terms of the sheer volume of numbers, more than 50% are basically paid exactly in those interactions.
Speaking about the scope of bribery, I see that in that report. I mean, there was some increase in some parts and decrease in some other parts. Is this a function of the level of economic activity in those regions?
That's a very interesting question. It is definitely, we found definitely that, and it should not be surprising, that those areas which are typically more affluent, if you want to call it that way, are also more where you have higher levels of bribery. So for example, urban areas in general people were more often requested to pay bribes, and they were more often willing to give in. There's also interesting data with regard to the role and the differences between men and women. Men in urban centers are almost twice as likely as women in rural settings to be requested for a bribe or to end up paying a bribe. So obviously, socioeconomic factors play a big role in terms of the exposure of people to this kind of bribe-seeking behavior, but also their readiness to engage in it.
Still talking analytics now, you've talked about regions and gender, but how about age range? Is there any findings along the lines of the age demographics?
Yes, there are some differences, but those differences seem to even out over time. There were much starker differences in the 2016 survey. In the 2019 survey, the differences between age groups, for example, when it came to attitudes, became more or less equal across all age groups. In terms of the exposure, there definitely it's, I would say, relatively young people, not very young people, but relatively young people. So between the age of 25 to about 40, that are about most exposed to bribe-seeking behavior, which is also, again, I think, an expression of the socioeconomic realities, that is typically the type of people that are probably most vulnerable at the same time, as well as the most likely targets, so to speak, of a bribe-seeking conduct.
Well, that report also reflects that even though there's been a marginal decrease in the number of people who have collected bribes, there doesn't seem to be any change in the frequency of, how it happens. Could you expatiate on that, please?
Right. Essentially, one interesting thing is that when Nigerians refuse to pay a bribe, in those instances where they do that, this is not necessarily a consistent conduct. So we only had a few, we have a certain number of people who don't pay bribes, full stop. But the large majority of persons that refused a bribe basically said so that they were doing so on one occasion, because on average, basically, Nigerians are about asked 6 times a year, so every second month, are confronted with a bribe-seeking request. And on some occasion, for reasons that we are not yet completely sure of, because the survey could not basically delve into that detail, for some reason, maybe the request seemed particularly unjustified. Maybe it came at an economically difficult moment, so the person that was confronted with the request was more willing to pick up a fight. Maybe actually it was exactly the contrary, that they felt more empowered in that specific moment to pick up a fight. It's not entirely clear. The only things that we see that are very clear, that the level of education is linked to the readiness to refuse a bribery request. So the more educated people are, the better they know their rights, the more likely they are willing to stand up to a request to bribe and really see it through to the very end.
Now today there's going to be a launch. An animation movie, Corruption Wahala. Sounds on a light note. But what do you hope to achieve and what should we expect with that animation movie?
Well, what we try to achieve is basically that not only very well educated journalists can access the information and your audience, but what we're really trying to achieve is to broaden that conversation about corruption, to give people actually a much more profound understanding. And the other thing that we're trying to do is to really take into account the fact that our audience is much younger, and we need to basically adapt our communication strategy, our communications channels to the needs of that audience. half of Nigerians are under 19 years old. We can't basically give them an 80 pages report and somehow magically think that they will start to read it. We need to package that report in a way that is attractive to them, that is palatable to them, that they like to hopefully watch. And that was the whole idea of behind producing this corruption movie called Corruption Wahala, an everyday tale, to contextualize it in a setting that is familiar to them, and then to tell them basically the main findings of the report, and also contextualize it of how they can use those findings in their own struggle against corruption.
I feel like watching the movie already. I want to watch as well. All right, then.
Please do so. We're going to go live this afternoon at 2 p.m. on all social media channels. So you can follow it on Twitter, on YouTube, as well as on Facebook.
I look forward to that, most certainly. Well, thank you for talking to us this morning. Oliver Staub, rep of UNODC. So we'll be back to take a look at your emails. Let's just go into it right away. So why go to break? Ayo, you want to break the ice?
Well, I'm really just looking at a number of things that a number of people have said here today, and
you can't read all at the same time. Just remember that. Just start one.
Well, it's rather curious that people are generally interested, especially. I'm almost certain that very many people who have watched us, especially from the opening, will be curious what is going on as far as the Galaxy the inner Galaxy company we spoke about in the opening sequence would be very much concerned. But one of them here, Mosh, is talking about one of the issues that we have raised. The vast majority of Nigerians have one capsule solution, which is education. When the FG pays attention to education, there'll be a positive change in insecurity, economic corruption, and infrastructure. Education is the only way out. That's Mosh. And he was definitely referring to the issue we raised, about security with GD the other time.
Well, Adeshorunke says the Unilag drama is most unfortunate. What do you expect in an environment where a citizen is his own government with little presence of established governments in the daily life? This now produce leadership at most sectors who don't appreciate the principles of corporate governance.
Well, Felix Akpan says, it would seem like since ASU is on strike, the Unilag Governing Council invoked the doctrine of necessity to appoint an acting vice-chancellor pending when things normalize. We should focus on the alleged crimes of the deposed VC rather than the process for now. Deposed?
Can I squeeze in Professor Nayana's comment? He says, well, citizenry continue to suffer from government's jaded economic policies, which is the hallmark of leadership, failure, responsibility. The endurance for irresponsible governance is thinning. Governments need to remember there's so much the people can take in the mindset of uncertainties. Well, we do thank you all for your comments. Much appreciated, and we hope the authorities will step in quicker and save those lives involved in that Galaxy company. That is the show today. We thank you all for watching. Don't forget, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
And I think I'm going to re-echo that. Take care of yourself by keeping safe, and do wear your masks and take care of others as well in that regard. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a great day.
And thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your comments as well. I'm Malwe Ogun Yusuf. Have a great weekend.